Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, Kyle and I are going to give you a rundown on transpersonal psychology, which for whatever reason is under discussed in the psychedelic world. So we're here to help you out a little bit in understanding what that is, what it actually means, the history, all that kind of stuff. But before we dive in, let's do a couple announcements maybe.
Cool.
So do we have anything special happening? There's no workshops on the books, to the best of my knowledge. Do you have any breathwork workshops?
No, I kind of put everything on hold just because I'm going to be hanging up at the Gibsons, helping out with some things, with some behind the scenes breathwork stuff. So I've kind of put some of my stuff on hold because of that, which should be good. I think we'll get some good work done and hopefully start developing this training program to
Absolutely
train people.
I'm jealous about how much time you're going to be up there. I really wish I could be there with you too, to like you said, help develop this training stuff. I really think it's going to be huge, and just stay tuned, everybody. It's going to be a big deal once we have this stuff going, and we're going to make a big stink of it. So just hold on, and it's going to be cool. So what else is going on? We're still selling Navigating Psychedelics. You can reduce harm with you and your friends and others at festivals and elsewhere by getting educated, by taking Navigating Psychedelics. It's filled with 12 masterclasses for people from various sub-aspects of psychedelia, talks about test kits, fentanyl, all that kind of stuff, ayahuasca, how to stay safe, how to get something from the psychedelic experience, and a lot more.
Yeah, and we'll probably be launching some more live courses in the fall. Summer seems kind of tough for people. People are out and about, so yeah, we'll relaunch some of those live courses in the fall once people get back into a schedule.
Right. We had a lot of really great testimonials from folks who took the class with you, 6 or 8 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm. 8 weeks.
8 weeks. And yeah, they loved it. They got really educated and had room for group collaboration. So it's Navigating Psychedelics plus 8 meetings with a class, a cohort of sorts. And yeah, it seemed like there's a lot of fun community building and a lot of progress happened for a lot of people.
Yeah, and if anybody has any, I don't know, questions or like anything that they would like to see in education or possibly a course, feel free to reach out and, maybe we can help develop that over the course of the next few months or so.
Absolutely. So yeah, please do reach out to us. And if you want to support us, hit us up on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google. There's a lot of places that people listen to podcasts. So just give us a review, give us a shout out, maybe share with some friends. And if you really, really want to help us out, maybe check out our shop, psychedelicstodayshop.com, for t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and more. And I guess we can get into the meat of this thing now, unless there's anything else.
Nope, I think we're good. Yeah.
Cool. Transpersonal psychology. So I know somebody who did a strong focus in transpersonal psychology at Burlington College. and I don't know, what did your NDE kind of like steer you towards, like this whole concept of transpersonal psych?
Yeah, so after I had my near-death experience, I really was trying to figure out what happened to me, and it just felt like I went somewhere and something kind of spoke to me, or I just like left my body and I went somewhere else and really didn't have a framework to work with. So I spent like the next few years trying to find that framework. And I ended up finding more of a framework to work with after coming across psychedelics and having like a really profound mushroom experience. And that led me to the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And then I was reading some Ram Dass, Be Here Now. And then after another really difficult psychedelic experience, I came across Grof's work. And then, one of the first books I came across was Rick Strassman's book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. I was just in the bookstore, and the book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, research on near-death experiences and other mystical experiences just caught my eye. And I was like, well, shit, I want to learn more about my near-death experience. Maybe there's something cool in there. And I think that's kind of where I fell into the phrase transpersonal psychology. After I read that book, I picked up another book where it was like an author. He was the author and a few other people, and it was called Inner Paths to Outer Space. And that book, that particular book, I think at the end of that book, there was some stuff about Stan Grof in the field of transpersonal psychology. And at that moment, I was just like, this is what I want to study. Like, I need to find a school that offers transpersonal psychology programs. This stuff is just far too fascinating. And I knew I didn't really want to just kind of study regular psychology. I wanted to study consciousness and some of these more philosophical questions of life and death and what is consciousness and what are these experiences? Are they real? So yeah, then I came across some of those other books, Tibetan Book of Living and Dying and Be Here Now, and then Stan's book, LSD, Doorway to the Numinous. And at that moment, that really kind of solidified my my idea of wanting to go get a degree in transpersonal psychology.
I spent a lot of time looking at all the different programs in the country and internationally. For whatever reason, just never took the plunge. But transpersonal psychology has been a huge draw for me, and it's part of the reason why I'm still so involved in this stuff, breathwork and psychedelics. It's just so fascinating, and the implications are enormous.
Yeah.
So let's get into the history, I guess.
Okay.
So really, there's a couple streams coming through here. Stan Grof and many others were doing LSD research in the USSR, the States, and in California, Maryland, like really Canada too. Lots of stuff happening in Canada. I bet there is plenty of interesting stuff happening all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one stream. Weird stuff pops up when LSD is in the mix. And another stream is Abraham Maslow, pioneering psychologist, founder of the school Humanistic Psychology. And that's kind of a study of, how would you phrase it? Like, I only really know to talk about the hierarchy of needs and kind of reframing it a little bit to be more about like, it's kind of like proto positive psychology, I guess. That's how I kind of frame it. But how do you frame humanistic?
I guess like when I think of like humanistic psychology, I think about like kind of like that person-centered approach. So thinking about like really cultivating human potential. And so that the first field was humanistic psychology. So with like Maslow and Carl Rogers and a few other folks, really trying to focus on the potential of the human potential, and also kind of being a little bit more person-centered, because you just had like behaviorism and some of these other branches of psychology that just kind of treated people like machines and animals.
Right.
It was just like, but realizing that there's more to the human experience than, we can program you, you're kind of animal-like or machine-like. And, even Lenny always kind of talked about Freudian as mechanics, hydraulics, like that's the way he kind of viewed the psyche, was kind of in hydraulics, pressure building up and releasing and stuff like that.
Right.
So
there's obviously a lot. It's an interesting metaphor, right? It's kind of valid, but there's limitations, just like with behaviorism.
Mm-hmm.
Valid, but limitations. And I think humanistic came around to answer those things. Like the dominant fields, like, were very limited. So what's next?
Mm-hmm.
And this was it. And it worked out really well, I think. It changed the landscape of psychology quite a bit. And
definitely.
I think it became dominant for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny, like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, very effective, kind of Freudian. But I think, like, I used to react against it because I thought it dehumanized, but I'm like, it's really effective. Like, why would we not use something that's not effective, even though the theoretical underpinnings are just like, dog in a cage with a bell, It
is effective. I mean, I rely on a lot of CBT stuff in some of my work. So, I mean, having some sort of structure, helping to reframe thoughts, I mean, it's helpful, The one program I was at was very heavily on CBT. And, it was helpful for people in crisis to just kind of help reframe different thought patterns and to provide a little bit of structure, giving out little homework assignments or just work to work on. So I don't know, I've always kind of found it a little bit helpful. And obviously it's not something I would completely rely on, but it's a nice tool in the toolkit.
And the hierarchy of needs, which is kind of a fundamental conception of humanistic psychology, is that you need more basic needs met before you can reach higher needs. At the peak, it's like a happy life and fulfillment, kind of actualization of your potential. And I think Maslow started seeing things that didn't really jive with the model, like peak experiences and flow states, that kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like cosmic consciousness didn't really fit into the thing, and neither did kind of quote unquote holotropic states, like healing visions from various psychedelics or breath work or whatever, yoga, all that kind of stuff didn't necessarily fit the model.
Yeah.
So those are the two streams. They collided. And I think Stan had a friendship with Maslow. They corresponded a bunch. Can you briefly run through that Esalen story?
Yeah, the way Lenny kind of described it was Maslow was driving up Highway 1 along Big Sur, really foggy night. And he just kind of came across this there was a light on, and he decided to check it out, and it was Esalen, and it was kind of like synchronicity. I forget a little bit of the backstory, how Lenny tells it, but it just kind of showed up there, and I believe it was around the time like Grof was around there, and like all this stuff was starting to form at Esalen. So it was just a very unique kind of synchronicity that happened, where he just showed up there, and Eslen's kind of like the birthplace of like human potential movement. I mean, there was just so much stuff happening there. And then, so yeah, I mean, this clash between humanistic psychology, but then all that stuff that was happening in the 50s and the 60s with psychedelics. Like I just came across something that was put out by the Beckley Foundation. Like LSD is probably one of the most like research chemicals. There was over like 4,000 clinical studies back then, or something along those lines, which it's something that I guess isn't always talked about, or piece of history that we don't really acknowledge, that this is a very common research chemical throughout there. And then, so how did these more kind of transpersonal experiences, psychedelic experiences and stuff like that fit into psychology? And so a group of people got together and started to kind of have these conversations. And first it was kind of pitched as transhumanism psychology, as like a new terminology for this. And then Grof came up with the term transpersonal. And so, yeah, there are a bunch of meetings happening at Anthony Stewich's house out in California. And this was kind of like the beginning to deal with some of these issues known as transhumanistic or beyond humanistic psychology. And Abe Maslow is one of the guiding participants for these meetings. And obviously he was really well known at that time for his peak experience theories, and how peak experiences might help bring an individual more clarity and awakening in somebody's life. And then, Grof ended up using the term transpersonal to two of his colleagues, Maslow and Viktor Frankl. And then nobody knows who Viktor Frankl is. Existential psychiatrist, and wrote
Holocaust
the book.
survivor.
Yeah. And
what was
so
the Man's Search for Meaning?
Man's Search for Meaning, yeah, correct. So escaping some of the concentration camps, and I mean, that story is really interesting, and how when you just beat humans down, like, is there any meaning in life anymore? And he said yes, you could still develop meaning. I think in the end of the book, like, he talks about how like everything's just destroyed, and it's just so like gloom and whatnot, and there's this little flower just kind of peeking up out of like all the disaster. So kind of saying like even in the depths of everything there could be meaning emerging. So yeah, this new field of psychology that was being born out of the humanistic movement, this transpersonal psychology, would soon be known as the fourth force of psychology. And I don't know how people view that now, but I guess back then that's how they viewed it. And yeah, and so
Right.
the field of transpersonal psychology was officially announced in 1968, and it separated itself from the humanistic approach.
With a Maslow's support and all those others, including Fatima and Sudich and many more. And it's very cool to see because there's this notion right now in the psychedelic world that science might not be adequate. There's so many phenomena that can pop up that are very difficult to research using the scientific method. You'll see even Dennis McKenna is trying to work on this thing, calling it natural philosophy. So like returning to pre-scientific method investigations. And there's some validity there. At a certain point, when you have lots and lots and lots of anecdotal evidence, you can make pretty serious suppositions around that. And that's it's kind of difficult to do transpersonal research, I think, because
Hmm.
how do you with holotropic breath work, how do you really control all that stuff and focus on huge experiences like total unity experiences? Like that's a 1 in 1,000 kind of thing, maybe less. you know
Yeah, it's hard to really measure some of those experiences, or yeah, how do you measure it? How do you make meaning out of it?
but they happen.
Yeah, they happen. What was something last night Lenny was talking about with Whitehead, of like when we were talking about some of these transpersonal experiences, that like all experience could be real, or like all experience is dislocated. Do you remember what he was saying with that?
There's a few things. So like um we have a hard time locating experiences. Like we think this experience happened at XY location at Z time, whereas you could be at that coordinate but accessing a thing from very different coordinates. So like how a lot of us have visions of the world on fire sometimes, like that's a really traditional vision, and it doesn't have a simple location. It could be everywhere at once. Like in physics, there's this concept of non-duality,
Hmm.
and yeah, I guess simple location is kind of the fallacy, because we are able to communicate at near immediate, um, like with no real delay over huge distances, um, like that flipping of the electrons polarity at a distance. That kind of proves that there is a non-local connection that's testable and provable
Hmm.
in a lab environment. So we have that as a foundation. Then we can extrapolate out from there, like perhaps how some of these things play out. Like you had a UFO experience, but maybe it was just the experience, and you kind of like fell into a different part of time or something like that, time and space, or like somehow that time and space merged into. So the Whiteheadian thing is kind of like there's a fundamental unity in all experience being the fundamental unit of the universe for Whiteheadians, and like as opposed to the atom for physicists, it's more experience for Whitehead folks. And there's people working at the high level to really reconcile those things. But yeah, I think kind of just derailed that a little bit. Hopefully it didn't get too tangential. Where were we?
Yeah, once we start getting into the philosophy stuff, it gets start down the rabbit hole with Whitehead and some of this stuff. Um, well, we were just kind of wrapping up about, yeah, how do we measure some of this stuff? I have a mission statement here that was developed by Stewich, one of the original mission statements that was in the first issue of the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. Maybe it makes sense to read that.
Yeah, go for it.
So the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology is concerned with the publication of theoretical and applied research, original contributions, empirical papers, articles, and studies in meta needs, ultimate values, unitive consciousness, peak experiences, ecstasy, mystical experiences, be value, essence, bliss, awe, wonder, self actualization, ultimate meaning, transcendent of the self, spirit, sacralization of everyday life, oneness, cosmic awareness, cosmic play, individual and species-wide synergy, maximal interpersonal encounter, transcendental phenomena, maximal sensory awareness, responsiveness and expression, and related concepts, experiences and activities. As a statement of purpose, this formulation is to be understood as a subject of optional individual and group interpretations, either wholly or in part, with regard to the acceptance of its contents as essentially naturalistic, theistic, supernaturalistic, or any other designated classification.
Mm.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
there's like kind of three main points to this. So the focus concerning on dealing with experiences that are traditionally classified as mystical or religious. Second, the emphasis on empirical and scientific studies to help understand said experiences. And then the third, to seek and suspend any belief regarding whether said experiences and phenomena are to be classified or dismissed as supernatural or not.
Right. It's good stuff. Like, yeah, you can talk to something that presents as God or a God, but what is that reality? That's not really part of the question here. It's about more the experience. And John Mack, who we were talking about last night with Lenny and Elizabeth, is this Harvard psychologist or psychiatrist, and he was treating people with UFO experiences and dealing with their experiences as if they were real, and not really worrying about the implications of like their reality, but more just dealing with the trauma that was brought on by those experiences and treating it as if it was a real event, which I think is really cool.
I mean, something came up for me with that. I remember when I wrote this article about my near-death experience in psychedelics, where it was like, I kind of got sick of seeking whether or not like how this is real or is it real or what are the mechanics there, but like really, has this influenced my life? What has it taught me? And like, how do I move forward with this? Because I mean, I could sit there and dwell on some of these experiences and be like, what's going on in there? Like, is this real? Like, how do we validate this? How do we like really understand these experiences? But at the end of the day, for me, like, I just kind of came back to, has this made an impact, like an impact on my life? And how is it like influencing my life? And how am I moving forward with it? Because I could just sit there and dwell on it for, days and days and weeks and months and years. But like, where is that really getting me?
Right. And you can see this in DMT users sometimes where they're like, I really got to go back there and figure that out. The more I do it, the more I'm going to find out. I think there's some problems there because it's such an infinite space and we have such finite cognitive powers that, how are we really going to interface with that and figure it all out? Or is there even anything to figure out? But, we can get caught in those cognitive loops and kind of just, spend years there trying to figure it out.
I definitely did. And who knows, maybe DMTX will shed some light on some of those questions.
Those brave people.
Yeah.
Happy they're not me. Yeah. So, okay. So we've got like kind of the essence of what we're trying to study here in transpersonal psychology, which is, clearly distinct from parapsychology, which is kind of just focused on ESPs type stuff. But some people will conflate the two. So we have a very discrete set of experiences we're looking at and figuring out how to work with them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, like it spans all religious traditions. Like it wants to encompass all those traditions, all those literatures, which makes it really fun for people interested in religious literature, mm-hmm. Which is kind of like another one of the things that just got me jumping down the rabbit hole, like, Hindu mystical traditional literature, Christian mystical literature, stuff like that. Like just really fun to read that and kind of compare it back to what Stan and these others were talking about. Mm-hmm. Really helped me kind of reframe everything and realize that it's not necessarily the individual that's special. Like it's this stuff, we all have the potential to access this kind of thing. And playing with my occult stuff, it was really interesting to see people come back with these kind of messianic things here and there. And the community in the occult side was like, okay, That's, a message for you. That's not necessarily universal.
Right.
And I loved seeing that personal, universal kind of thing, be part of that community. And I wish we could see that more in the psychedelic world.
Mm.
I think we're getting there. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Like, you can be your own messiah, but please don't try to be mine.
Right. And that, I'm looking at my notes here from some of this old stuff I wrote up about transpersonal psychology, of like some of the criticisms back in the day, like when this field was starting to develop. Some of the resources I was using were back in 1996. I don't know if, I'm sure some of this still applies, but yeah, just how sometimes like in this field, and we could even think about this in regard to psychedelic work, where the field just kind of focuses mostly on these transcendent experiences and kind of ignore some of these emotional states of suffering, jealousy, and guilt, and we kind of just kind of bypass everything. So just kind of dismissing some of the darker sides of human nature,
Right.
and not really maybe getting into some of those shadow things, which I know, we're starting to, more and more people are starting to have more shadow conversations, which I think is important, and more people are talking about spiritual bypassing and whatnot.
Yeah,
And
which is
then
really helpful.
yeah, and then Albert Ellis, one of the cognitive behavioral therapists, he kind of thought, I guess, like in the beginning of this, sometimes these theories or experiences could really lead towards like dogmatism, disagreement to science, like absolutism, and kind of narcissistic exception with the self, which sometimes you see in psychedelic states as well, where we just
Hmm.
get so caught up in self and kind of forget about everything else, and these experiences, and yeah, and sometimes it can be kind of dogmatic. um,
Mm, very true. Very true.
um,
And yeah, how do we avoid those? It's going to be really interesting.
mhm,
And learning from a lot of the history out there is going to be important too.
mhm,
I'll be, be so examples. Charles Manson, Jim Jones. Um, the negative parts of the Tim Leary culture. Not all of it was bad, in my opinion. I think a lot good there, but there's definitely some dangerous stuff happening. It was early days, so it was easier to manipulate and lie to people. And I'm not saying Tim lied to anybody, but that scene, there was definitely some weird stuff going on. Same thing on the Kesey side. There was definitely some weird stuff going on. So it's easy to kind of indoctrinate somebody into this whole thing. So something to stay aware of.
yeah. And now that we have like some of this, like, I guess, more advanced technology, like fMRI machines and whatnot, like, that can really influence this field too, like merging the science and spirituality and trying to figure out what's going on there, and kind of putting, I guess, more yeah, just more like objective science to some of these experiences, which, I think can be helpful for trying to understand it, but, can also be really dismissive of people's experiences and just be like, well, this is just what's going on in the brain and your experience isn't true. But
Right, right, right. Um, so yeah, it's transpersonal psychology, not necessarily about proving what the reality, I guess ontological status is the phrase, what the status is of these things, more the psychology behind it. How does the human interface with these experiences?
mhm,
How do we work positively with them to create happier, healthier people?
yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
and thinking about like, my approach towards like, if I become a licensed therapist and I orient towards like a transpersonal psychology framework, like I'd be more interested in exploring somebody's transpersonal experiences, talking about psychedelic experiences, working with breath work, working with non-ordinary states, and like really just focusing on how to use these states to maximize health and benefit, and
yep,
yeah, like
absolutely.
overall just maximizing your potential.
Yeah, yeah, it's huge. Um,
Because there's a lot of stuff there. I mean, once and like you get into like symbolism and archetypal like psychology and all this stuff. I mean, there's so much like kind of philosophy to explore there as well. And I guess that's what I'm really interested in, is the philosophy aspect of this field, because yeah, some like regular psychologists don't have that. And I think that was like a criticism where like Lenny was, when he was going through his PhD program for psychology, it was like not enough philosophy, like we kind of need to think philosophically about some of these issues. And then once he started his other doctorate program in philosophy, it was like not enough psychology. So trying to find a way to mix philosophy and psychology, because I mean, philosophy is at the base of psychology. You go back to like ancient Greece. I mean, that's what it was. So, looking at symbols, looking at meaning making, these archetypal figures, and how does that weave into psychology, and how can that really help us,
Truth. So I guess let's give some specific examples. So like there's people working to integrate the Kabbalah into this, and the experiences that Hebrew mysticism can bring up in people, how to work with those states. There's people working on the yoga stuff. So what are those wild states that can sometimes happen in yoga sessions, like a Kundalini awakening, kind of spontaneous spiritual emergence going on there sometimes. There's a lot of stuff with psychedelics, obviously, because that's kind of the most surefire way to trigger these transpersonal states. And I think what else is there in terms of like categories that they work on?
Another big field within transpersonal world is astrology.
Right, that's true.
I mean,
There
look at
seems to
like,
be some reality there.
yeah, I mean, look at like some of that CIS program, like philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, where Stan and Rick Tarnas they used to teach a class on, astrology and kind of psychedelics and consciousness. So
We've never talked about that on the show, I don't think, like the fact that Rick Tarnas and Stan Grof would look at astrology once in a while to, it's not too great to like predict what's going to happen, but you can use it retroactively to theoretically make sense of what happened for the individual. So if an archetype in the astrological, forecast is really strong at the time of the session, those things might come out thematically or otherwise. Strong death tones, time, love, war, those kind of things. Astrology's tough. Like, I really want to dig more deeply into it so I can feel more sane when I talk about it, because it's wildly complex. Thankfully, we have a good relationship with Becca Tarnas, so maybe I can learn from her. That would be nice. So, yeah, astrology, super interesting. I suggest some of you check out Rick Tarnas's work on Cosmos and Psyche if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning about how, say, some of these astrological transits could influence non-ordinary experiences, say during like a breathwork session, another author, Ren Butler, came out with a book, Pathways to Wholeness, and you really kind of taking Tarnas's theories and Groff's theories and kind of combining them. And yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of like just I don't think it's like really a book where you kind of read through it unless you're super into astrology, but just kind of picking out different transits and figuring out like where some of that stuff could be influencing you. Like if you're really into that and a certain aspect coming up, you can look at some of those aspects and before going into an experience, and might have an influence. Say if there's a strong like Neptunian transit like influencing your chart, could be like a really kind of boundaryless experience. Tying that to like a Grof perinatal matrices, like could be like a womb like experience where it's just like this oceanic bliss, no boundaries and and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know, it's just a different framework to maybe make sense of some of these experiences. I like to think, even with like the birth matrix or even astrology and stuff like that, they're just kind of like maps, they're frameworks. They're not, I try not to think of them as like, this is why this is happening or whatnot. It could just be like a nice little framework to be like, okay, maybe this is having some sort of influence.
Right. Yeah. You have to make up your mind on that stuff by
Yeah,
yourself. It's not too important. It's more important to stay engaged with the work,
yeah.
and just keep doing the work. If you're a patient or a therapist, it's something you could get trapped into, and 10 years later you pop out going, oh, okay, this is useful now. So it's better as like a sort of part-time thing that you integrate into your practice slowly, but don't necessarily dive all the way in right away, because it
Hmm.
it takes years and years to get good with it.
Hmm.
So I think we're kind of good on this subject generally. Do we want to jump over to maybe the perinatal matrices and Grof's kind of contributions, or should we? Is there other transpersonal stuff we could dig into?
Um, oh, I guess like just really quick too, like another framework that I spent a lot of time studying in the transpersonal world was in the realm of shamanism.
Hmm.
And so, that's kind of like a huge part of that. And I also think like certain eco psychology theories can really play a role in transpersonal theory as well. But yeah, even the word transpersonal breaks down to beyond the self. I guess that's something that we didn't really define what transpersonal is. So like whenever I explain this stuff, it's like looking at those experiences that are beyond the personal. So beyond like, yeah, meditation experiences, near death experiences, dreams, psychedelic experiences, yogic experiences, any type of spiritual or mystical experience. I mean, yeah, the list could go on. UFO abductions, stuff like that. So it's just it's a field that's just really kind of analyzing and observing these exceptional human phenomena. You know, what's going on here? Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, if we want to dive into Grof is
Well, let's maybe speak specifically about the shamanic experience and what kind of things could pop up in that world that are transpersonal and weird.
okay. Um, well, I think anything transpersonal in the shamanic world could be, working with plant medicines and working in those non-ordinary states. I mean, a lot of shamanic techniques are kind of working in non-ordinary states, not all the time, but it kind of has a history of working within non-ordinary states. Um, there is, I guess, like a transpersonal type of archetypal narrative phenomenon there of like the shamanic illness, which is really interesting. Of maybe somebody getting called to this work, having a near-death experience, falling ill all of a sudden, getting attacked by these spirits, and really kind of opening up. And that can really kind of fall into this category of spiritual emergence as well. So, somebody's just normal life, then like gets really sick, almost dies, or and maybe during that experience it feels like a really common thing too is like being eaten and destroyed by like spirits and then being put back together again. So it's like this concept of this wounded healer going through this initiation process. And that's something that kind of really resonated with me in a sense of having this near death experience. But when I got to Burlington College and I found this teacher that taught these shamanism courses, I was telling him about my experience, and he was like, "Oh, he's like, yeah, that's a shame because if you grew up in a traditional society, the elders would have taken you away from school, taken you away from your normal activities, and they would have gave you the tools and techniques to learn how to work with this new way of being." And that's just something that Western culture doesn't have. Like when these experiences come up for people, we either rely on psychopathology. There's something wrong with this person. You know, versus maybe this is some sort of initiation process where they're being called to do healing work of some sort. Um, Instead of saying, this person is manic, schizophrenic, bipolar, whatever that is. Um, then viewing it through a lens of more of a transpersonal lens, saying this is an initiatory process. How do we work with this person now? How do we teach them tools, and how do we really support them through this? And that's can get really tricky because not all initiatory processes maybe are guiding somebody towards a healing path. Maybe it is some sort of mental health issue budding. My teacher had this story when he went to Africa on like a safari thing. They came through this town, and there's a crazy guy just acting out in this tribe, and somebody on the tour bus or whatever they were in, they're like, "Oh, that must be like the village shaman," and then the villager's like, "No, he's just crazy." So there is a sense of romanticizing a lot of these states or these experiences, and when really, there might be something else going on there. So it is kind of like a double-edged sword of trying to navigate this world.
Yeah, it's really tricky. Like spiritual emergence is this interesting topic we've talked about on the show, and you're now kind of teaching people more and more about this. But it's this concept that I think Grof and a few others talked about at first, about how spontaneous shit just happens. You don't have to even be in a traditional culture. And the I think the first step is figuring out, how do you diagnose, like, is it spiritual emergence? Is it psychotic break that needs treatment? Like, it's a really tricky thing to figure out.
Yeah. It is. It is. I mean, when I worked with people kind of having early episode psychosis, I went in there with a more transpersonal spiritual emergence framework, and then realizing that maybe this isn't working. Maybe this isn't actually beneficial for some of these people. Um, but then again, it's also the container and maybe the culture that we live in too that just doesn't really support that. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a bigger topic, and there's definitely a lot of, like, I guess, philosophical things in there that we could really chew on, because it's very complex. When, like, well, for example, like when I guess I was going through mine to get a little personal, it's like something inside me told me that, like, just stay grounded. You're going through this experience, like, it's fine. So it was like I was able to kind of manage all these weird symptoms that were arising. Like something inside of me was just intuitively telling me that it's fine. And it didn't get to the point where, like, I was like really like acting a lot of these things out that were going on in my head, say, versus somebody that is having a much harder time controlling that. It might be beneficial to seek a safer container to work with that. But unfortunately, the way the system works is more of like drugging people up and suppressing it. So, but
Right.
I've seen instances where medication can be really, really helpful. Like a nice benzo to get somebody to sleep that hasn't been sleeping for days, and they're like becoming paranoid and having hallucinations that, like, staff members are out to get them and injecting thoughts in their head. And then you get them on a medication just for a few nights, and watching their symptoms just kind of like vanish because they were able to get some sleep. Or then I had a time when my teacher, the shamanic practitioner, came in, and we did a little bit of like traditional healing work with this person. And 2 weeks later, I was walking down the street, and somebody yelled from me from a utility vehicle, and this person had a full-time job within 2 weeks, and I don't know what was going on there. Could it have been the sleep? Could it have been some of the transpersonal healing that was going on? I have no idea. um it's
Right.
interesting.
And it's funny because there's this in the psychedelic world kind of dogma against any kind of psychiatric med. So it's really tricky,
short
because
short term can be really beneficial for some
yeah,
folks, just to
exactly.
get back to baseline, manage some of the symptoms. I think the hardest part about some of that stuff is just coming off and knowing how to taper and withdraw from medication, because I think a lot of folks, the one psychiatrist that we worked with, she said, I never had training on like withdrawing people. It's all medication management. Like, we aren't really taught that, and who knows, maybe that's changed. I mean, she went to med school in the '80s, so. But medical director of a huge organization. So, and
Yeah, yeah, it's huge. So yeah, I guess the Stan would talk about supporting people in a 24/7 residential facility. through their spiritual emergence as being kind of very helpful. We don't have any hard data on this, but they were able to do this at Esalen and other facilities across the world.
Yeah, Soteria. There's another place, Iwar, Diabasis. There are a few of them around the Bay Area.
Right. So giving the people space they need to do that, and often it would be pretty long, like 40 days, maybe longer, sometimes less, for them to like integrate all that crazy stuff that popped up. So, hopefully we can start doing some real research on this stuff. Like, do you know if people are doing any kind of studies like Soteria or elsewhere?
When I was at Soteria, I don't know like how much research they were collecting. But I mean, Soteria, the original Soteria house, that was a 12-year research project that I believe started early 70s, I think, or maybe late 60s. I forget the timeline. But that went on for 12 years. It was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, run by Dr. Lauren Mosier. And, their success rate was around 70-75%. But they were dealing with people with early episode first break, minimal hospitalization, minimal exposure to medication. People that we were seeing were coming in with medication withdrawing. So it's a little bit different because people are exposed to some medications very early on nowadays. And so, yeah, I don't know, like the Soteria model is definitely popping up. I just ran into the old director of the program, and he said there's a few houses popping up in Turkey, I believe, now.
Oh,
And
cool.
so it's catching on internationally. But yeah, like the idea of having like this 24/7 care for people going through like some sort of transpersonal spiritual emergence process could be really beneficial. One thing that I noticed was like, okay, 1970, no cell phones, no laptops. There's like a sense of community working through stuff. Fast forward 2015, 2016, everybody's on their phones, laptops, very individual. So like felt like sometimes a community container wasn't necessarily there all the time.
Right.
Which, and how does that influence people's healing process when we're kind of all like separated or individual?
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, context, group, and technology all play a huge part.
Yeah. But it will
Absolutely.
be interesting to see how, like, if they are collecting research at the place in Vermont, how, like, what their data looks like. I mean, I'm sure they are because it was funded by it was funded by the Department of Mental Health. So, they
Oh, okay.
obviously have to report to them. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, like, what 5 years looks like at a place like that now.
Right. Absolutely. Um, hmm.
And I was there in the beginning, so obviously starting anything, there's a lot of bumps. So maybe what I
Yeah.
saw isn't really how it's operating now. I was just there at a very, yeah, it was starting up a program it's a lot of work.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump. We've got about 10, 12 minutes to try to do BPMs. And I think that's enough. So, so Grof eventually came up with this theory and framework for perinatal matrices. So perinatal, meaning around the time of birth, matrix, grid, kind of like series of four types of experiences, categories. I don't really know the best way to put them. They're these kind of archetypes. So the way we've been taught this subject is they're the first things that you encounter as an entity coming on, being born. So like you're this, single cell, multicellular organism, you grow, grow, grow. All of a sudden you're born and you're, no longer getting fed by an umbilical cord. You got to breathe air, eat food, drink water, all that kind of hard stuff. So there's this shift, and the matrix kind of moves you through that to understand like larger archetypal buckets that things might fall in. I don't know. Any way you would have phrased that different?
Mm, no, that's pretty spot on. Just to maybe backtrack a little bit too, Stan came up, like one of his major contributions to this was adding these two domains to the, he calls them the cartography of the psyche. So, you know, you have your biographical and biological aspects of self, and then adding the transpersonal realm, which could, yeah, be any of those things that we described before. You know, past life experiences, this, that, and then the perinatal. So, you know, these are observations through all of his work, studying LSD and
Right.
psychedelics.
Yeah, I think the story was he got out of Soviet Prague with a suitcase of his papers and a couple changes of shirts to go to a psychiatric conference in the States. So escaped the Iron Curtain, didn't get to hang out with his family for decades, I think, after that. Was sitting in a park just working through his papers, trying to see like, okay, now I'm not a practicing clinician. What can I come up with here? Kind
Mhm.
of notice these large themes and worked through them. So in later books kind of elucidated them at length. So the first one being one, obviously, it's BPM one is how we kind of phrase it. And it's this kind of peaceful, everything being taken care of, totally comfortable state. Think, you know, a baby in a happy womb being fed and everything's taken care of and there's no stress. Um, but there's also the flip side of that, right? There's the light side and the dark side of each one. The dark side being, what if your mother is having a autoimmune reaction or like constantly under stress or using really harsh drugs or drinking or whatever. um, I think it's good to understand that, you know, yes, there's this positive, but there's also this negative.
Yeah, it's typically described as like good womb, bad womb experience, the primal union with the mother. So yeah, it could be
Which
oceanic and
ex-
blissful, could be toxic, and seems like you're getting poisoned.
so yeah, consider like cosmic consciousness being kind of like a further extrapolation of that in a sense, and also the flip side, a hell experience, um, torture, endless torture, yeah, waterboarding or whatever. So, um, and number two is like the compressions start happening, the womb starts contracting. No exit is one way of looking at this. Like you're getting compressed, there's no way out. You can kind of think of like Kafka or Jean-Paul Sartre here. Just yeah, because his book, one of his most famous books, is called No Exit. And Kafka, there's, you know, Kafka-esque is this term we use for like, you know, never-ending labyrinths of torture and nauseating things. And yeah, I don't think there's really a positive side on this one. It's it's, you know, maybe there is. I could be wrong. I don't know. What are you thinking here?
I think the positive side to it is um like going through that much pressure. Like I think about like maybe a seed underground having a lot of pressure, it needs to crack, or you know, I think of maybe like carbon turning into diamonds or something like that. It's like the pressure is creating the birth experience. So yeah, it doesn't feel good. It feels like there's like no escape. It's like when the uterine walls begin to contract, but you know the cervix remains closed, which you know there is some debate. I've talked to some midwives, and you know they argue a lot of these like the physiological things that are happening in the womb there. But just that idea that you're in this contraction and you know there's just no escaping, and you just kind of have to sit through the process and wait for the cervix to open to make your descent. So yeah, it can be really painful. It can be like you feel like you're going crazy, like in yeah psychedelic or breathwork states. It just feels like there's it's never going to end. You're going crazy. You're going psychotic. Like it's just this like dark depression, rumination, just feeling helpless and hopeless. You know, it could be really intense and lonely. And then there's, you know, some physical things going on there. Maybe constriction, feeling like you can't breathe. Um, but yeah, I think, you know, to the flip side, it's like, wow, I made it through that. If I can make it through something that intense, then, you know, life
Reminds me of
needs.
my ayahuasca experience and some breathwork experience, or a lot of my breathwork experiences where I'm just sitting there in this fucked up state, like no hope for exit, no time, no concept of time. And I'm just like, fuck, the most intense horror and fear. And for whatever reason, I flip in and out of like, yes, I'm on drugs. Yes, I'm in a breathwork session. I know it's going to end, but like, then I go back in and kind of forget all that, come in and out. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, right? Like, think about that culturally, think about some of your past psychedelic experiences, how it might relate there. There's some interesting correlations. And do you want to talk about 3?
Yeah, so that's when the cervix begins to open, and the uterine walls are beginning or contracting still. So it's like I think about it like the descent, the hero's journey. You're about to go on this journey, but it's called the death and rebirth struggle. So through the birth canal, the fetus begins to struggle for its own survival and begins its journey into life. So there could be feelings of anxiety, suffocation, feeling like your life is being threatened, um, and yeah, then there's like some archetypal themes that could come up. So like in breathwork or psychedelics experiences, like if you are having these archetypal visions, could be related to something like that. So reliving or experiencing Titanic flight, demonic episodes, sexuality stuff. um, and yeah, it's really interesting. Grof will like in some of his books talks about like some of the psychopathology behind it. It's got some really interesting stories. So maybe like some of those really intense like sexual fantasies could be tied to this, because maybe you're getting exposed to bodily fluids during this experience and whatnot.
Right, all the bodily fluids and poop and whatever else, like that being one of your first kind of experiences with humans,
hmm
or like being born, this huge change, it's all kind of tied into this really intense experience. So of course there's a chance that could imprint and come out later, as kind of quote unquote sexual deviant behavior.
hmm
I'm not trying to put a value judgment on it, people. If you want to do that, cool, whatever, just as long as there's consent. So and probably BDSM stuff happens a lot here too. And there, if you look at that, you'll see some really interesting correlations between the matrix and
hmm
that. Even like they call there's like a floating state that happens. It's kind of like BPM 1 in a lot of ways. Like after you get beaten a whole bunch, like that could happen.
Yeah.
How do I know that? It was huge in the occult world, so like a lot of people talked about that a lot. And I was kind of like the boring person because I just didn't know. It's like, oh,
mm,
whatever. I'll ask you questions because I don't know what the hell's going on. Cool. So, yeah, light at the end of the tunnel is like kind of the essence of that one for me. Like it's a
yeah.
really fucked up time. It's a pressure cooker. It's kind of like an alchemical process in a lot of ways. Like the
Yeah,
mind.
and then some of the, like archetypal themes, or could be like visions of like natural disasters, so like earthquakes, volcanoes, like all this kind of like upheaval, like things are getting like because you're starting your descent, and your life that you knew in this safe womb is starting to get like shaken up, and you have to make the choice to whether to descend down and survive. And then yeah, the fourth and final one, the death and rebirth experience. So this is like the separation from the mother, begins to exit the birth canal, and then the umbilical cord's severed. So this could be expressed by liberation. The struggle finally comes to an end, emerges into the light, born into a new world. Um, Feelings of relief, feeling blessed. It's kind of like, yeah, almost like kind of what you said, like unitive consciousness, and like, wow, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and man, I made it through this really crazy ride. Um, yeah, anything you want to add there?
I think that's really it. Um, is not There's not too much to really go into on that one relative to the others, but I will say that there's another doorway. There's a book called A Different Doorway, I think, and cesarean births are a big deal. It's a very different way of looking at the birth process, and I was one of them, and I come from that worldview. and my experience set. So I never got BPM 4. So I had 1, 2, and 3. So there's some really interesting archetypal things and themes that I will play out that, you know, play in there. So
no resolution.
exactly.
That one.
Yeah. So, and needing help from others and you know, just feeling stuck a lot. So a lot of things, and you know, it's fine. We can get through it. A thing Lenny always says is we're going through like one of the biggest psychological experiments ever conducted on humans by having so many cesarean births. We're not accounting for the psychological difference between cesareans and natural birth humans. And he always talks about how like fitness is a big deal, like really working hard is a big deal for cesareans, like fitness wise. And if you want to get rich, invest in fitness equipment in Mexico, because they're like through the roof with cesarean births. And you know, 15 years out, we're going to see a lot of people doing fitness down there, and could go really well.
Yeah. And yeah, these matrices, I always like to say these are kind of just like maps, you know, it doesn't necessarily dictate anything. Could just help you understand a breathwork or psychedelic experience. And you know, there's more and more research coming out that you know, the fetus is developing implicit memories in the womb. It's learning to say that, you know, Freud said, you know, we're born a blank slate, tabula rasa. And so to think that we come into the world just as a blank slate is, you know, starting to become debunked, that we are developing implicit memories in the womb and learning. We're starting to learn our mother's language and all this stuff. So to really think that, yeah, you do have these kind of implicit memories, which are more kind of like intuitive memories, you know, just instinctual memories that are in the body that could potentially be tapped into when you're working with these non-ordinary states and breath work. So it is interesting. I've definitely had my fair share of birth process stuff come up in breathwork sessions.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how they play out often. Like I've seen people giving birth, had the experience of giving birth, being born, and having sex all at the same time. And that's like and that's not uncommon. Well, it's uncommon, but it's like, it's not unprecedented. Like it's kind of a typical thing to have all that stuff mixed up. So I always find that fascinating to see those kinds of extreme states.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes like when you go back and ask questions, some stuff lines up. Like there was one person in the group that years ago saying that they could taste ether and smell ether, and found out that her mother was triple dosed during labor with ether because that's what they used back then. For me, you know, I felt like I had an umbilical cord wrapped around my neck during my first breathwork session, couldn't breathe, and that happened. Parents thought I was going to die coming out. So, you know, it's interesting once you start kind of digging into some of this stuff, and really has made me question a lot of things. I'm like, what's going on here?
It's good they know what ether smelled and tasted like. I would like to know what that smells and tastes like. Maybe someday if I'm lucky. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good wrap there, man.
Yeah.
So people out there, if you liked it, let us know. Like if you have questions, let us know. We'd love to answer those questions. Make sure you go in a good positive direction. If you want to learn more, Grof's holotropic breathwork is a great place to kind of learn about these things at a high level. His other books, many of his other books, dig a little deeper into this stuff. So it's not an easy path to learn all these things about BPMs, but there is a path, and we're hopefully going to help you through that in the near future, in the next year or so, with classes and other stuff. So yeah, again, if you want to support us, check us out on socials: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think we have a LinkedIn page. We've got a shop, Psychedelics Today shop.com. Tons of episodes. And yeah, I think we're really hitting a stride. We're coming up on 100 episodes. We have no plans for anything special for the 100th episode, but I hope we can pull something awesome together for it.
Yeah.
So stay tuned on that.
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, if there's anything you guys would like to see, whether that's more videos or Facebook Live things, or if you are a Patreon or patron, um, do you want to see anything on there? Yeah, just let us know. Give us some feedback. We want to provide value for you, for the community here, so we're open. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to those different places. And our podcasts are now on YouTube too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. And if you want to become a Patreon subscriber, check us out, patreon.com/psychedelics today. And you can see all of our offers there. And if there's something, like Kyle said, that you're not seeing and you want to see before you become a donor, let us know. Maybe we can make it happen. All right,
Thanks so
take
much,
care,
everybody.
everybody. Bye-bye.